Thank you for joining our Imagery International program. We hope you found it stimulating. imageryinternational.org.
This is Sue Ezra. I'm the moderator. I'm also the membership chair of Imagery International. And we will be having the three panelists, Susan Gold, Cheryl O'Neill, and Gina Vance, who are Imagery International members and also practice imagery and hypnosis, and really are representatives, I think, of many of the Imagery International members who use hypnosis. So the idea of having a panel to share some ideas and speak from experience of how imagery and hypnosis can be blended together is the idea behind this telechat tonight. And I'll introduce the three speakers who all happen to be certified hypnotherapists and in California, just by chance. There are, like I said, many other hypnotherapists who are Imagery International members, I'm sure, in other parts of the country too. So Susan Gold is in the San Mateo area, which Terry will know very well. And she's doing work in educational setting, working with high school students with imagery and hypnotherapy. And Cheryl O'Neill is an instructor with the Hypnosis Motivation Institute in Los Angeles, and has also developed the Therapeutic Imagery Certification Program for the American Hypnosis Association. And Gina Vance is a behavioral therapist who is the founder of Integrative Wellness Center and the Resource Group, and she's from Modesto, California. So what we'll do is have each speaker talk for about 15 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes we will open the hour for questions, answers, comments, and people who will have hypnosis experience or have combined the two, please feel free to enter into the conversation at that point. For the participants other than the panelists, I'm going to ask you now to mute by pressing *6. And then anytime you want to speak, you just press *6 again, and then you can speak. So if you wouldn't mind going back and forth with that, just so that it decreases some of the background noise and comments. Okay, so I want to just say one more thing, then I'll turn it over to the panelists. I did want to just welcome everybody who's on the call or will be coming on the call, and to welcome them to Imagery International, either as a guest or maybe you're already a member. And also wanted to let you know about our really wonderful conference that's going to be October 22nd through 24th. It's going to be in Menlo Park, California at the Vallombrosa Retreat Center, and it's called Imagery for the Future, Illuminating Lives. And there's going to be some hypnotherapists there as well. And more information about anything about Imagery International is imageryinternational.org. So my email, in case you want to comment or have contact with me, is susan@integrativeimagery.com. So enough of all that. I will turn it over to our first presenter, panelist, Susan Gold.
Hi, everyone. And Sue, thank you so much for inviting me to participate on this panel. I've been really looking forward to this and looking forward to learning from Gina and Cheryl and hearing what listeners have to say. This topic, it's been really of interest of me lately, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Before I share my thoughts on hypnosis and imagery, I just wanted to let everyone know that I did type up some notes summarizing my perception of the similarities and differences between hypnosis and guided imagery, and examples of how I use imagery in my practice. So I'll be posting those notes on my blog, which is hypnojournal.com, and I'll do that just as soon as we finish the telechat. And I've included some links to resources, including books that I really like on hypnosis. But I thought I would use my time slot here to share a personal experience I had this past spring that really got me thinking about the differences and similarities between hypnosis and guided imagery. And this story, it shows how my thinking about this topic has really evolved, and I hope you'll find it interesting. So here, the story is, my background is this. I have a hypnotherapy practice, but I also teach high school classes part-time. And this past spring, I finally got the courage to tell the principal at my school that I was a hypnotherapist. It was kind of like coming out, and that I wanted to do some volunteer work with the students on campus. And he was really supportive of the idea that we both had concerns about how parents might feel about me doing, quote-unquote hypnosis with their kids. So we decided that guided imagery sounded more parent-friendly. So I was providing guided imagery for athletic performance for the girls' basketball team, and guided imagery for stress reduction, and various topics, all under the label guided imagery. So on the literature that went home with the permission slips, I was open about being a hypnotherapist. And some students had already come across my website, so the word was kind of out a bit anyway. And I found that each class that I went to, there would be someone in the class who would immediately shout out as soon as I walked in the door, "Are you a hypnotist? Can you hypnotize me?" And they had seen the stage hypnotist at the county fair, and they'd seen hypnotism performed on TV. And that seemed really exciting to them, maybe even a little more than guided imagery. So I had to spend a little time addressing the fact that I was a hypnotist and what that really meant. And then the question would come up, well, what's the difference between guided imagery and hypnosis? And I found that, I had been asking myself the same question. I've heard a number of hypnotherapists say that guided imagery and hypnosis really are the same thing. I wasn't entirely convinced of that. I felt that both modalities naturally led to a trance state, and I thought guided imagery, I thought of it as being a rich, vivid journey, but maybe more passive. And my answer to the kids was that guided imagery was one technique that hypnotherapists use with their clients, but that hypnotherapists had a lot of other more interactive techniques that I would not be using with them. And I learned soon how ignorant that idea was, because since I was doing guided imagery, I thought I should get some training in this area. And I attended a day-long guided imagery workshop with Suzanne West. And I'll put in a little plug for her because she's got another one coming up next weekend in Oakland. And her workshop was just wonderfully eye-opening and inspiring. And there I was introduced to interactive guided imagery and subpersonality work. And I ordered all the books that Suzanne recommended, and I joined Imagery International at that time. And I listened to some of the previous telechats, and I got recordings from Beyond Ordinary Nursing and the Center for Healing and Imagery. And the more I learned, the more I realized that many techniques that I considered to be hypnosis were, in fact, also utilized in the guided imagery field. So, for example, subpersonality work is similar to what I would call parts therapy or ego state therapy, which is work that I really love. Both fields can use age regression and have shared techniques for pain control, etc. So despite this revelation that these fields were very similar, my experience in working with the kids did help me realize that while hypnosis and guided imagery are mostly the same, there are some differences. Although I think that in my own mind, this is a work in progress in understanding that. I work somewhat differently in my group sessions with the kids than I do with clients, or when I do group hypnosis workshops. So first of all, I did not feel a need to do a lengthy pre-talk to define hypnosis and dispel myths about it. And that was really liberating because I found it freed up a lot of time. When I work with clients or hold hypnosis workshops, I always need to address what hypnosis is and isn't. I'm sure many of you out there can relate to that. And I've had people come to me thinking that I'm going to put them under, that they're going to be asleep, I'm going to control their mind, and they're going to wake up not remembering anything and free from their problems, which is, of course, a real myth. And another difference is when I do hypnotherapy, I always include early in the session what hypnotherapists call a convincer. Because hypnosis is such a natural state, many clients, they're expecting to feel deeply altered, and they need to be shown that something in fact is happening so that they know the process is working. So a classic example of a convincer going back in the history of hypnotism is called eye catalepsy, where the practitioner asks the client to pretend that their eyelids are so relaxed that they simply don't work, and then has the client test them and find that the harder they try to open their eyelids, the tighter they close. The convincer that I like to use is just simply having the client focus all of their awareness on one hand until they begin to notice some slight sensation there that they wouldn't notice otherwise, like a little tingling perhaps. Doing the guided imagery with the kids, I didn't feel a need to use a convincer because I didn't feel a need to convince them that they were in hypnosis, which was, again, really liberating. And I told them that guided imagery was as natural as daydreaming, and they accepted that. When I do a hypnosis with individual clients, I'm always considering the level of trance necessary for the type of technique that I'm doing. So, for example, for a direct suggestion session, which incorporates imagery, a lighter trance state is fine. But for deeper work, such as regression, I'm looking for signs of somnambulism and using deepeners to get the client to go as deep as possible. And there can be a lot of counting down, counting from 20 down to 1, sometimes using imagery for that. So because a lighter state of trance is usually most appropriate for working with a group, and because in my mind, guided imagery practitioners are not concerned with measuring the depth of trance and achieving somnambulism, I didn't include deepeners in my work with the kids. And I would love, I'll be really interested to hear what others have to say about that, because I don't know. I'd like to know if others do use deepeners in their work and are thinking about level of trance. So anyway, overall, here's a summary of where I'm now at in my thinking about the similarities and differences. For similarities, I just see that both hypnosis and guided imagery achieve a natural trance state. Both help the client achieve desired change. Both can be used to explore the core cause of a problem and to give a client access to their inner wisdom. And both include an induction of some kind. Many hypnotherapists, like guided imagery practitioners, will ask the client to take some deep breaths and then guide them in a progressive relaxation followed by imagery to induce trance. But there's also a lot of hypnotherapists that prefer rapid induction, where the conscious mind is startled and confused, leaving the subconscious receptive. So in that kind of induction, imagery might not be so much a part of it, although it could be incorporated. So in terms of differences, at least where my thinking is right now, I think with hypnosis, there's a real problem with misconceptions needing to be dispelled and a pre-talk to educate the client that that's really necessary before the therapeutic work begins. And a lot of hypnotherapists will do suggestibility tests as a part of the pre-talk to see how receptive a client is, to show them the power of their imagination, therefore creating the expectancy that the session will in fact work. Hypnosis session, there's that need for convincers to show the client something's actually happening. And then hypnosis, I'm thinking maybe being a little more concerned with measuring and achieving the depth of trance required for the therapeutic technique. And so using, therefore, deepeners, can be a lot of counting back, but it can be imagery, as I mentioned. Suzanne West gave a suggestion for a great deepener, which I liked, the idea of imagining a leaf or a feather slowly falling from a tall tree, taking you deeper and deeper as it falls gently into to the ground. And then I think perhaps one difference between the two fields is that hypnosis, one technique that's really popular is direct suggestion. And direct suggestion may or may not evoke imagery. I think a direct suggestion session includes imagery, but the direct suggestion itself is an affirmation. So for example, when I like from the book Hypnosis for Change, I release stress from my life, and I'm a calmer, more effective, healthier person. So it's more of an idea, though a client certainly might imagine what that's like. And let me just check in, Sue, on time. How are we doing?
How about 2 more minutes?
Okay. So as I mentioned before, I did put some notes on my blog, or I will post it after this. But I'll just, let's see. I'll talk about direct suggestion and examples of how I use guided imagery, even in a direct suggestion work. Creating a goal image, having the client merge with the image at the end of the session. So for example, imagine that slimmer you stepping out of the mirror, the photo, walking towards you, and you're walking towards her or him until the two of you merge and you can feel what it's like to be at your target weight. In a direct suggestion session, a lot of releasing of the negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that have stood in the way of the desired change. So for example, imagining the negative being pitched to you like a baseball, and you're just batting it out of the ballpark. Or imagining the negative forming a sandcastle fortress at the ocean and waves just lapping up and eroding it all away. Or imagining the negative thoughts and feelings in the form of leaves, which you throw into a fast-moving river, or the form of bubbles or balloons, which you can pop until they're gone. So there's a lot to be included there. For weight loss clients, I like to have them imagine an internal fuel tank. 0 is empty or starving, and 10 is full to the max, which is great for a car but uncomfortable for a human. So what number represents the experience of having eaten just enough to leave you comfortably full and satisfied? So a lot of different ways of incorporating imagery into the work that we do. And I'll just stop there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. And now we'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Well, first of all, Sue, thank you and Imagery International for creating this time for all of us together. And I want to also thank Susan Gold for a lovely, well-prepared 15 minutes. That was just great. I think of hypnosis and imagery so closely intertwined, kind of like a double helix. You cannot have one without the other almost. My mentor, Dr. John Kappas, who founded the Hypnosis Motivation Institute, in his manual of hypnotism writes that you cannot have hypnosis without imagery, and I might add that you cannot have imagery without hypnosis. And so when we look at the two together, particularly my work as a hypnotherapist through the years, we're in the field of hypnotherapy. We're very acclimated to the phrase visualize and imagine, or imagine and visualize. So we know the imagination is always there as part of the subconscious mind, working on expectation and imagination, not knowing the difference between fact or fantasy, we might say. In ways when we do describe to a client the first time that they come to a session as part of our overall helping them to know what hypnosis is like. And I actually find that a lot of fun to help people to see that really it's something that they're familiar with more than they realize, because there are several, I talk to them about several trance-like states that are natural in a day that we all experience. The half hour before we go to sleep at night, when we're sort of dropping down into that sleepiness, is a natural hypnotic time, and that's a wonderful time to write out a positive affirmation, or to think happy thoughts, or to be reading an inspirational book, certainly not for late night news or watching some shoot-'em-up bang-bang movies, but more we want to take something light and inspirational down with us. In the morning when we awaken, there's also that natural hypnotic time. We may no longer be sleeping, but our eyes still may be closed. And it's a lovely time to imagine how you want your day to go, to begin to see yourself fulfilling the goal of the day or your overall goal, to imagine and visualize right there. And then, of course, we know the daydream, which is what we liken hypnosis to, that we're one place and our mind drifts off somewhere else. And that's rather like a daydream is like many times what we might even do in imagery, like a directed daydream experience as a hypnotherapist, which is not exactly the form of what we know to be called guided imagery, but it's a cousin, I might say. And then, of course, we like to tell them about driving down the freeway, experiencing environmental hypnosis where they missed their exit. Have they ever found that to be an experience that they have? So helping them to get acclimated to what hypnosis is, maybe something other than they thought at first, because we have our fantastic and wonderful entertainment industry that often takes us down into ideas that we're going to go to a zone that we can't get out of. And so it's kind of fun, I feel, to sort of help them to know what it really is. Now, imagery in the realm of, say, what most of us are familiar with the term guided imagery, although I do make a distinction through my hypnotherapy work and with students that I teach and work with at the Hypnosis Motivation Institute, that perhaps the term guided imagery, as we might use it, could be referencing something much more literal, because we do work with different suggestibilities. The suggestibility for hypnotherapists might move into two different kinds of suggestibilities that we all have some of. One would be the very direct and literal. So you're walking on a beach and you feel the wet sand between your toes, the warmth of the sun on your back. Now that would be very literal, of what we call guided in a literal sense. But for the inferential, the other type of suggestibility, meaning that it's not just the words that are being said, it is the meaning behind them. I heard what you said, but what did you mean? In other words, the tone of voice is listened to, the extraverbal movements, and that some people who have higher suggestibility on that realm might really be finding themselves responsive to the kind of imagery that you're calling guided imagery. I might call it more freestyle. In other words, it's open. It's allow an image to form for that place where you feel secure and comfortable. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. Describe what you're noticing. Now, that's if we're doing interactive. If we have them in what I call the immersion state, when they are completely in the hypnotic state, depending if we're deep or light doesn't matter, but I still might ask questions that are more allowing for them to form their own images rather than giving them very direct and literal images to go with. So the suggestibility factor is something that I always do check in with. We look at handwriting. This is all on the first session. There are questions and tests that we go through. And we say no wrong or right answer. You can't pass or fail. Can't help or hinder. We just find out naturally how they're responding. And we do work with, in the first session, some arm raising technique. It's a primary induction that I would probably always do as people come to my office and in my practice. Now, sometimes I might receive somebody who comes to me who doesn't want hypnosis, and they only want to do imagery. It's rare that that happens, but I've had it on occasion. And so I might continue, I might do a couple little things suggestibility-wise, because we feel that's always important to know, because a word, one word can make a difference. Words mean different things to different people. And a special place might mean one thing, a personal place could mean another, a healing place, a quiet place, a peaceful place. So we often work with knowing that different words, as they mean different things to different people, can make a difference in what the imagery actually is for them, whether they're in a deeper state of hypnosis or a lighter state. So when practicing the, what I might call communicative imagery, what we might do is a progressive relaxation or progressive comforting. Even right there, I'm going to be addressing those two words differently. Relax is more for the literal, receiving suggestibility. Calm, comfortable, more for what we call the inferential suggestibility. And when we're saying suggestibility, we're simply saying how we take in information, how we learn. So moving into the communicative, it's a lighter state of trance, because when the client is speaking out loud, their state lightens. But the communicative continuation, as we go through that process of discovery, the depth of the experience is so rich and enhanced and involved. And many times I find there's quite a difference from a person who comes out of what I call an imagery, a communicative imagery process. The client comes out feeling like, oh my gosh, I was in my own movie. There was really this whole thing that was going on. While we hear a lot as a facilitator for that kind of process, we still don't know, maybe there's like half that we don't get to hear that they're so involved with and in. It's a beautiful experience. Time after time I see it with clients. Whereas coming up out of a full-on hypnotic where there's no communicative experience between hypnotherapist / facilitator and client, the experience in the hypnosis, while maybe completely relaxing, there is the capability, if we get into deeper states of trance, where conscious mind completely goes into abeyance. The client might come up and have a sense here and there, but they may have what we call a little hypnoamnesia and not remember consciously. But as long as we know they're in the depth of trance and they haven't actually gone below that, which we don't want them to do. We don't want them to go to in sleep states, but that they are in a place where they've received suggestion or received the imagery in the immersion state, but they, coming awake consciously, may not remember it at that moment. It might become, they might have some awareness of it later, like a dream sometimes comes back to us later in the day. A technique that I do like to work with as a hypnotherapist, we call it transformational imagery. And this is where we take any imagery process that we're going to, say, do communicatively. And once we complete that process, we close it out, and we thank the images. appreciate them for coming. And then we look at our massive notes that we've taken from that process. And throughout the time that we've been communicating with the client, we might have starred or circled or created ways to know that, oh, here's some fears to desensitize, perhaps some strengths to reinforce. Maybe we underline information that appears to be from higher self that we want to reinforce or even reframe. We look for clarity. We look for insights. And, of course, resistance, which could indicate some kind of conflict and maybe lead later to another kind of communication with aspects of self, I call it, which you might know as parts work or submodality work. And so now we could, because this, since the brain, the mind, learns in images, I always say that imagery speaks subconscious ease, and so it's that language that we're on the same page with. So now we hear back from the client what is their, the way the images are coming, and as they're having the conversation with them, and we're in that discovery process looking for all those key statements. Now we can close out the imagery, take the client to the top of their stairway. I call it sort of wrapping around them some suggestion that reinforces some of the things that came from the journey, and then deepening them on their staircase with a count of 20 to 0, and then perhaps doing a few more suggestions that come from the process. Now, I don't do this every time at all when doing communicative imagery, but sometimes it really lends itself, depending on what we're doing with the client, what type of therapy it is. Sometimes for what I call mastery work, life mastery work, where a client is with you for a little while, more than just short interim sessions, but really trying to move a major way of viewing the world and thought process of who they are and how they're responding, how they're behaving in life, from something that might have been much more negative to a much more positive, reinforcing response to life and living. It's very helpful in those cases. I don't usually work every week communicatively. If I do a big communicative type of interaction in state with a client, the next week, whether I do transformational at that time or not, the next time I see a client, I'm probably going to do them in what I say immersion, where they're, even if I'm using imagery. And so we kind of look at that imagery and hypnosis. They're both, we're in trance. Since we would say there's about 139 different little incremental levels of hypnosis, that just closing our eyes, we're going to some sort of altered state. And I guess another thing I wanted to bring up, if I'm not sure of my time right here.
I think another 2 more minutes for you too, Cheryl.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But how imagery has sort of influenced me in calming people or relaxing them, if I'm just going to do imagery. And that is, I often work with this idea of a breeze, the gentle breeze. As you take those 3 deep breaths, imagine a gentle, just the right temperature of a breeze that gently blows around your head, neck, and shoulders. And as it moves around, we sort of, while we're mentioning body parts, we keep emphasizing the breeze, and it moves all the way down, through until we hit the toes. And you might wonder at some time if the breeze is breathing you or you are breathing the breeze. That breeze sort of induction in a gentle way for imagery works so beautifully, especially if we're going to walk on a path in the woods, if we're going to go into an archetypal mythic journey, which I lean to a lot metaphysically, hypnotherapy lends itself to all of that, where the breeze works nicely, and especially for people who aren't too keen on going through the body parts for a progressive, because there are a whole group of people that rather not like to keep thinking about their body. So it's sort of lovely in that way. And so those are a couple of things I wanted to share with you, and I hope that as we can all continue, I know I keep learning and growing, hopefully, every day as we continue to discover more about this wonderful topic, which I feel quite passionate about. And thanks for this time and sharing.
Perfect. Thank you. Some more wonderful images and suggestions. So now we'll move on to Gina. Hi. Wow. Isn't this a rich field, though? Mm-hmm. You know, really. And once in a while I work with folks that are that have autism, and the people that are experts in autism and how to treat it say that it's actually an autistic spectrum, and there are as many ways to treat autism as there are people with autism. And that I find is very analogous to imagery therapies, imagery practices, guided imagery and hypnotherapy, and whether it's directive or interactive, so I'm just struck again by the richness of the unique approaches of Susan and of Cheryl, and also of my own. And I use my background in hypnotherapy and guided imagery for therapeutic and for healing purposes. And there are many, many ways to use it, of course, to sell products, to entertain, to make movies more dramatic and exciting. But my kind of bias is, and my orientation is to really have a collaborative relationship with the folks that I'm working with, where they feel like their work is very choiceful, and that there's no need to comply with any demands that I make, or even suggestions that I make, and it's to me it's more nebulous sometimes, but more exciting when a person comes in and they want me to hypnotize them and then wake them up and have their problems be solved, and yet I show them how they have the capacity to do that, and that really and truly no one else can do it, except that we get our challenges in community and collaboration, and that's often how we get out of them. And there are many, many ways in order to use all of the abilities that a human being has that are under that umbrella of imagery and hypnosis or hypnotherapy. One of the clarifications that I make for myself in my practice is that the kind of overarching paradigm that my approach is contained in is different than what I think of more as the old-time hypnosis, but really it's the old-time way of doing things, which is and when I first graduated from hypnotherapy school, I had the sense that it was my responsibility to diagnose the client's problem and then prescribe the exercise or the protocol or the technique to help them to resolve that. And then over time, my clients taught me really what they needed, and in ways that I could best facilitate them. And so that older paradigm of the old doctor-patient model, where my job is to find out what the problem is and tell you how to fix it, and your job is to comply, is passing away more so. And there are times when that is really beautifully appropriate, especially in emergency situations. And so it's not throwing it away entirely, but really practicing the collaborative model more, which is something that we're much less used to, in all of our systems, whether they're religious or educational or medical or whatever. So that's kind of my passion, is to show you how to collaborate first with yourself and the different aspects of yourself, and then other members of the community, the outer community as well as your inner community, in order to get what you want. And one of the things about my approach is that, I let my clients know that I don't, in the context of our work together, we're not going to consider any emotions as negative. We're just going to acknowledge them, and then find a way to dialogue with them. And so that's really one of the key components of the place I encourage my clients to get to, is to be able to dialogue, to communicate with whatever they perceive their problem or their obstacle or their desire to be. And we also, I skip a lot of the formal steps, but not really, but I just do them in ways that are in shortcuts. One of my passions is when I work with youth at risk, kids in juvenile hall, and professional men, which oddly enough have a lot in common. They aren't interested in what they think of as meditation or imagery or being hypnotized, because of all those connotations about, losing control. And so we do talk about examples of trance, and some really wonderful ones were given by Susan and Cheryl. And one of the things that I like people to know is that hypnosis is really, and I think Cheryl talked about it, it's a way that we learn. It's how we take in information, and then give some examples of that. And essentially, we learn, or we get hypnotized, or we get programmed in two ways. One is repetition. Whether in school, that's a very popular one in educational systems, repetition. And but also, maybe your mom, repeated over and over, well, you're the smart one, but your brother's a good athlete, or you're the pretty one, but she's smart. And these things that we hear over and over and over can act as hypnosis or programming. We learn information that we're given, and we make it our own. The other way is heightened receptivity, and that can be because of traumatic events, which one definition for trauma is an event that we perceive to be overwhelming or life-threatening. We're very, we're wide open, receptive. If you think of someone that's frightened and you imagine them, with their eyes wide open, maybe their mouth is open, they're extremely receptive, and then that thought that crosses their mind can become a very powerful program. Or prestige suggestions. So someone that we deem to be a significant authority in our life, whose opinion or ideas or perceptions we value more than our own, that can become a learning for us, or a program, or a form of hypnosis. So those are the things that I will share with folks in order to kind of demystify the hypnosis thing, but also people know that there's power in hypnosis. I also, in my town, we sometimes struggle to say what we do because not many people have heard of guided imagery. They're often saying, well, what is that? Lay people. And but everybody knows about hypnosis, and everybody thinks that it's powerful. Though, of course, most people have learned from the media about what hypnosis is. So, so often
powerful in a negative connotation, right?
Exactly. And we can use that same power. The person can use that same power in positive ways. So just like the power of a nightmare. So if you have awakened from a nightmare, and when you awaken to your body, it was an actual event. You might be trembling or perspiring, or your heart is palpitating, and so you can use the same power in more pleasant and more positive ways. So with your imagination. And let's see, what else? One of the things that I talk about is that hypnosis really has nothing to do with relaxation, any more than rapport has to do with body mirroring. And that's not to say that sometimes, in order to facilitate someone getting benefits from hypnosis or imagery, that relaxation isn't important. But I think what's really happening is we're facilitating receptivity. And what I've noticed is that that relaxation is a net effect of being entranced with something, with having your attention on something. And sometimes being in trance is not relaxing. It can be very exciting or it can be very terrifying. And so trance and relaxation aren't necessarily partners all the time. And so relaxation is not required for someone's attention to be placed or given in a given direction. And though it is often a net effect, just like when two people are in rapport, they often will just kind of automatically mirror each other's body language, but that's not what created the rapport. So a couple of ways that I look at trance, are in the now. It's a way that that you are focused, where your attention is given to predominantly. And we have an ability to have a very wide scan of attention, and then we can also narrow our focus. And then sometimes we've got recycled information, reminders on things that are in our memory banks or wherever we store that information in our bodies. And oftentimes, for the folks that I'm working with, those reminders are like red flags or red alerts connected to unfinished business or trauma or undigested material, incomplete rites of passage. Most of the people that I see, they're in trouble. And they're in a lot of pain, and they're high achievers. So in my private practice, they've tried a lot of other things, and they haven't been able to get the results they wanted. Or out with the youth so-called at risk, they're the ones they're in jail. So they did enough, they achieved highly enough to get incarcerated, and so. There are things that they're either fighting against or running from, which oftentimes might be referred to as resistance. And in my experience, what my clients have shown me is that resistance is a conflict between desire, what we want, and what we believe is okay. So there's a conflict between desire and belief. And so the way to resolve conflicts is to have a collaborative dialogue. And so really, again, then we're getting back to how does a person enter into that kind of collaborative dialogue. And so my favorite induction, which, I don't even talk about as an induction, but it's my favorite, it's very quick, it's very powerful, is simply to ask people if they would take their attention into their body and just check in with their body and notice what it's like in your body right now. And what do you notice? And of course, if it's a single person I'm working with and they can tell me, if we're in a group, when we're done, they can share as they like. But our body, ourselves, that's the be-all and the end-all, the number one most important thing to each of us. And it is actually very entrancing. And the other thing is, though, even though we're really good at noticing what's going on in our bodies can tend to be storage units of pain and all the material that nobody's really showed us how to process or how to deal with or what to do with. And so we often don't want to keep our attention in there too long because we don't feel like there's anything we can do about the material that's in there. And so then we start getting symptoms, whether we act out on them and cause harm to others, or whether they cause symptoms of discomfort or pain or disease or whatever for us. So being receptive. Receptivity is a big part of our work, and the first part of our work is just being receptive to yourself and your own experience of being yourself in your body. And then again, that goes to the emotions, because oftentimes, and there's the basic protocol to go through, where we would start with what do you want, what's your desire, and what's your intention, and then take your attention inwards, and let's find out how you can get that in a way that's most beneficial for you and safe, and then immersing yourself in whatever you're noticing. And so the simplest way to do that is to notice details. And then, you can go through all the different senses, the avocado senses, as they say, audio, visual, kinesthetic, the taste and olfactory senses, if you like. And then in the course of doing that, you're being receptive as you immerse yourself in whatever you're noticing, whatever it is. And then the dialoguing, and because most people don't have a lot of practice with this is where the facilitator is often very important to sometimes, give the person questions to ask to whatever it is that they're noticing. And part of the trick of doing the dialogue is to treat everything as if it were somebody. And so in that sense, this can be very playful work. You're just imagining that pain in your elbow, as if it were somebody. And if it was, what would you like to ask it or say to it? What does it want? What's it need? What's it trying to tell you?
I'm gonna have you pause.
Yeah.
Finish your sentence, Gina.
Okay. And then going on the journey to get what you want, and the experiences included in the journey, in my experience, they will spontaneously arise. When you ask for what you want and you take your attention inwards and you are receptive to what you're noticing, then if there are burdens you need to release or obstacles you need to address, parts of yourself that you need to rescue or retrieve, wounded parts of yourself that need to be rescued by you, perhaps exiled parts that you've sent away for whatever reason. Whatever you need to do in order to get what you want will present itself to you, or clues of the process for you to follow.
I'm going to have Gina pause now because I want to open up to the rest of the participants. And Gina, you bring up a lot of ideas and concepts, and the complexity is becoming apparent in all that we do and the different levels and nuances of this. So thank you. I would like to open it up to anybody who would like to chime in.
Hi, this is Joy.
Hi.
Hi. I'm really intrigued with the combination of focusing into the body through the guided imagery work. And any further comments on using body work and guided imagery in combination?
Okay, this is Cheryl, and I know that really it was lovely brought up by Gina, but I will say that every week I work at a free cancer support center, and I do guided imagery for a group every week. And we many times are working with images that go through the body, like light, like color, and we move it into every cell of every muscle, tissue, fiber, organ, bone in the body to bring them whatever it is they're looking for. Gina brought up something I didn't mention, when we're doing these imagery facilitated processes, they're, of course, allowing much more autonomy for the client than a more directed approach from the hypnotherapy side. But because we know that the imagery helps bolster the immune system for those who are in treatment, and they come to the center for their imagery, if they have the belief, and I frequently check in with a group and always ask a client who comes to me, because I work in that arena as well, cancer, and we need to have a medical referral, if they believe that their mind can affect their body. And, most people are, of course, either saying yes or I would really like to believe that. And so by working with a pure positive energy, a light from above, sometimes depending on the client's spiritual or / metaphysical beliefs, thoughts in this arena, working with a healing color, an angelic color, an energy, light, to move it through the body in this way, and then into the mind space, the 6 inches of space from the skin outwards, to again bring the image of health through having this sort of healing experience, or healing light, or healing color, however they want to imagine it. And I leave it very loose, for it has to be just the way it's right for them. And at the end, I often ask them to describe their experiences if they feel like sharing from the journeys that we do that have to do with helping their bodies to come into the image of how they want it to be. And And in particular with people who, when you have them in private session, it might get even more specific from there, of course. But work with it a lot.
Thank you to Cheryl.
This is Sue Ezra. Joy, did that answer your question, or did that give you some more on?
It did, and it also gave me some areas that I've dabbled in and can now refocus on.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So who else is participating that has some input? Again, you have to star 6 to unmute yourself, and then star 6 to mute again.
Hi, this is Donna.
Great. Especially interested in hearing people's input. So hi, Donna.
Hi. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed this presentation because it's never really been clear to me the difference and the similarities between hypnosis and guided imagery. So I just wanted to thank you and let you know that it really helped clarify a lot of my questions that I had with the two modalities. So I just wanted to thank you.
So this is Sue again. I have a question for one or all three of you. Do you tend to separate imagery and hypnosis in your technique approach, or more often is there a blending, as Cheryl was saying, that imagery and hypnosis really are like a double helix? That's a beautiful image in itself. But just in terms of technique and strategy, do you tend to choose one or the other, or is there more often a blending?
And this is Gina, and the image that just came to mind for me is that I'm a blended baby, you know, and oftentimes I find them quite beautiful when we see blended babies that are two cultures have joined to create this third element. And so no, I blend them completely and really blur the lines. But I don't do a lot of what's considered to be directive work or direct suggestions.
This is Cheryl, and really appreciate both Susan and Gina's presentations. I would say I'm more blended, but I do have this a directive approach if it's called for. Not all clients are comfortable communicating in state, and so I do try to find out as much as I can in the cognitive part to have it be what they want. That's what we always say, even though in that regard it would be direct suggestion, but it's based on their desires. It's all about what they want. It's not that we just take it on and make it be, you know, what we think it ought to be. Sometimes with certain clients and certain resistances, we might say we might take a backdoor approach, which again, I would go right to imagery, and that's where I would go to the semi-directed, I call it, archetypal work of Marielle Fuller, which is just beautiful, with going to the meadow and the wizard and the witch and the dragon and things like that are, and I've kind of developed those into one is more inferential speak. I have an inferential speak I do, or a more literal speak. And those are wonderful backdoor approaches, imagery-wise. And then just one other quick thing is sometimes in work, it's very much blended, but if I'm going to do the process where we communicate in state, which is so powerful, it can stand completely on its own. And then sometimes from there, I do that other technique of the transformational, but many times we don't need to at all because the work is so powerful in the imagery itself process. But I don't usually communicate week after week after week with a client. We might communicate, do the communicative process, then the next week is an immersion. Then we might do another communicative, so I trade it back and forth like that.
And this is Susan, and I would say that really the hypnosis and imagery is very much blended and completely integrated. I don't even have to think about where am I going to use imagery. It's just so natural. And even like in a direct suggestion session where it is getting what the client's particular temptations and triggers and desires, the imagery comes from them. And I just also wanted to say I've taken away so much from Cheryl and Gina, so thank you.
Pleasure, likewise.
Yes. Same here. I've loved this. It's so wonderful.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue for me to formally, again, this is Sue Ezra, thank all three of our panelists, Gina, Cheryl, and Susan. And what I'm taking away from this discussion is really that there's more similarities and there's more blendings of all of this work than I think I previously thought of as separate. And I do really appreciate all of your time and effort. Thanks, everybody, and we really hope to see you at the Imagery Conference. It's going to be fantastic, and I wish everybody the best.
Thank you for joining this Imagery International podcast. The music in this piece is provided by Shantha Shri. Find out more about our membership benefits, including our quarterly journal, at imageryinternational.org. Thank you for listening.